He's usually
He's
right.
the king of this.
Yes,
Yeah.
he-
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. All right, turning our phones on. Do not disturb.
There's quite a lot of snacks if anyone wants, if you thought for a second, like, maybe I shouldn't take 2 of something, take 2 or 3 of something. Feel free. I see a few more people are coming in.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's also a weird time because it's like people, folks just ended work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
well, here, let's wait for them to sit down.
Okay. Yeah, let us know if we're not loud enough. You can hear, okay, great. At least one of us up here has a big mouth, so I'll try and speak as loud as possible. I think we'll get started. As people come in, if we have to go back, we can always do that, but I want to be respectful of all of your time. And first off, thank you for joining us. H-1B is never anyone's favorite subject. It brings up stress, it brings up complicated situations. So what we're hoping at this event is an hour from now, after the presentation's finished, we're hoping you look at this and say, I heard a few things that I didn't know. Here's a few things my immigration lawyer didn't tell me. Here's a few things my HR team didn't tell me, and here's what I didn't find on Google. Here's one event where everything was put together, US options and other options, and hopefully you walk out of here saying that was an educational session. New information was shared, I didn't know any of these things, and hopefully it benefits all of you. Because again, as I said, the H-1B is no one's favorite subject. So this is Plan B for your tech career. Thanks again for being here. And Roman, over to you.
Yeah, so I'll be moderating. We'll do some just quick introductions so you all know who we are. I guess should we introduce ourselves? I know we have the information over here. So
Yeah,
I'll go first. We'll just go this direction. My name's Roman. I'm a former immigration attorney, so I practiced U.S. immigration for a few years. My career took a lot of different routes, but now I run an immigration tech company, and we work on H-1B compliance. So I'm very involved in the H-1B visa space. I don't practice anymore, but I still, if anything, I probably know more of the nuances a little bit than I did in the past. So hopefully we'll have a really engaging conversation today, and yeah, over to you, Mark.
Well, thanks, Roman. Mark Pavlopoulos, founder of Syndesis. I worked in Silicon Valley 20 plus years, 7 VC-backed startups. So I've always been in the software space, always in sales and business development. Started this company in 2014. The angle here is I'm an American citizen, California native, but I lived in Canada twice. I was there on student visas, and then I came back home to Silicon Valley, and then I went back and worked on work visas. So half a decade of living in Canada, it's a familiar place. When I offer that as an immigration alternative, I'm speaking from personal experience. Also helped 100 plus immigrants from either the US or around the world who had challenges with H-1B or couldn't get one. I helped them move to Canada, so we had the experience doing this. Over to Veronique.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Veronique Malcolm, a founder of an immigration law firm called Canadian Law Group, but we do both U.S. and Canadian immigration. Firm was founded in 2005. Prior to that, I was an immigration lawyer in Canada. I'm born in Montreal. I went to McGill. I'm a dual citizen. I'm an immigrant to the U.S. as well, being Canadian. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Veronique.
So we're going to talk a little bit about, here's what we're going to talk about today. So we've gone through the introductions. We're first going to just talk about the H-1B problem. We're going to ask you a few questions, like a few show of hands questions, but I'm assuming everyone here has heard about the H-1B, at least even if you're not on it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to go through U.S. alternatives. Some of them you may have heard about, others maybe you maybe haven't heard about. There's going to be an opportunity to talk through them. We're then going to talk about unconventional solutions to keep your U.S. job and get out of the H-1B loop. It's a little bit of a mysterious title here, but we'll get to it. That's sort of the fun part here. And then we'll discuss a little bit about what could be right for you. Obviously, everyone's situation different where your career is at, what your goals are in life, where you want to live, etc. But at least we're going to talk through the different options and then have you think about what could be a potential alternative. And then from there we're going to go through next steps, right? Some of you are working, maybe all of you are working, maybe some of you are students. What are some of the things that you can do walking out of here today to maybe take more control of your immigration journey to the extent that we can. And then of course the presentation will end and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A, for discussion, for networking, you all can meet each other, etc. So, okay, so first thing we're going to talk about is the H-1B problem. And by the way, I say this with the utmost respect to the US immigration system. My family came here as immigrants from the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union. I practiced immigration law. By all means, I love US immigration, but that doesn't mean it's perfect, right? And the H-1B is it's the most popular work visa, and there are, of course, many challenges with it. Who here knows about the F1 OPT, or have you all? Okay, right, so come here as a student, you get some work experience. If you're in STEM, you get 3 years of work experience. If you're non-STEM, you get 1. But the idea, of course, is that while OPT is great, it allows you to work in the US, you maximally have 3 years of doing that, which really equates to 3 years of trying to get into the H-1B lottery, right? If you file right away in your first year in OPT and you don't get into the lottery, you do technically have 2 more tries, if you will. We like to say 3 bites at the apple. But of course that, there's a maximum, and 3 years is not a very long time. It flies by. One of the other problems is that there are folks who have H-1B. I was talking to somebody here earlier today, which is great. You'd think, wow, you've got your H-1B, you've made it, right? But depending on what country you're from, especially if you're an Indian or a Chinese citizen, but really in other parts of the world as well, you may have your H-1B, but the line for a green card for permanent residency, as you all probably very well know, could be many, 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 many years. And at what point do you want to think about other options? If you're a founder, right? If you're a tech founder and you have an H-1B visa, there may be some restrictions on what you can do. There may be some, obviously, again, the green card piece comes in and that causes a challenge. And if you're a founder of a company, you want to feel secure in your place here in the US. You don't want to have your immigration options run out while your company is scaling, right? And then obviously, the fourth one here is just senior managers, et cetera, who are on the corporate side that want to hire talent. By the way, anyone here on the HR side, do you hire folks? Or even if you're a foreign national yourself, do you have people that you hire under you? Okay, well, we have one person. But in any case, hiring's great. You find somebody who's wonderful, but then the question of the visa sponsorship comes up, right? And the H-1B can be something that impedes people from hiring. There are other problems potentially, but these are kind of the main ones that we wanted to address here. So the question then comes up to anybody who's here on an H-1B visa is, do you have a plan B, right? Do you have an alternative option? I'm an immigration lawyer. I live in this world. I know the alphabet, A, H-1B, F1, J1, O visa, P, there's so many. But if you're here on a visa and you're working day to day, you may not maybe realize or know about all the different options that you might have. So, the point of this presentation really is to at least make you think about alternatives to the H-1B visa. So what are the options, especially if you want to keep your job, right? If you want to stay in the same time zone and not maybe move back to your home country and work nights or whatever. Maybe you love your lifestyle here and you want to keep it. What are the different options that you might have? So, okay, we are going to do some questions. You can raise your hand if you'd like. But I wanted to ask any of you all here if you are thinking about or have thought about, or maybe you're taking steps for any of these visas. So, for example, EB1. Anyone here thought about, looked into EB1 visa? First of all, have you all heard of it? No? Okay, great. We're going to talk about it today. So there's that. Have you all heard of an O1 visa? Okay. So, and maybe some folks here are trying. Have you heard of Day 1 CPT, if you've all been foreign students? Okay, so Day 1 CPT is when you join a university as a foreign student, and then you can start working from day 1. And then, of course, there are other options there, such as switching to different visa types, so being a tourist visa to stay in the U.S., an H-4, which is a spouse visa, to an H-1B if you happen to be married, L-1 visa, etc. So there are other options. I guess, show of hands, have any of you heard of the other alternatives? Okay, less hands, but okay, great. So we're going to talk through all of this today. So the first thing we're going to talk about, of course, is U.S. immigration options and alternatives to the H-1B. So I'm going to bring it over to Veronique to talk a little bit about this.
Hey, okay, so I'm just trying to get that again. I had it a minute ago and I went flying.
There you go.
I think I could see that far. Okay, whatever. All right, thank you so much, Roman. All right, so there are a number of, as Roman mentioned, visas available in the U.S. Us Canadian lawyers call it the alphabet soup of visas. It's not like that in Canada, and we'll get to that a little later. One alternative potentially, so essentially you've heard of immigrant visas and non-immigrant visas, right? So an H-1B will be a non-immigrant visa, but here's what you can think about. You can think of other non-immigrant visas that might be available to you if, let's say, you're on an H-1B and you want to think of, you can't get renewed, you're maxing out, think of an L1. Is that a possibility? Can you adjust? Does anyone know what an L1 or L1A is? Yeah, okay, that's, okay, a few people. So that's an intra-company transfer. Okay, and it's going to be in different categories. You have the L1A, which is going to be executive or manager level, okay, and it can be a manager of either people or a functional manager, meaning managing a function of the company, okay, a task. A project manager is the most common one we hear of, all right? Then you have the L1B, and the L1B is specialized knowledge person. So you're not an executive or manager, but you have specialized knowledge, which oftentimes is used in the IT industry as well. So those are the good visas to consider, and we do a lot of these Ls, both in Canada and the U.S. They'll give you an extra, so for an L1A, you'll get a 3-year. For a new company, L1A, ooh, what is that? So that's your employer wanting to set you up. So let's say home is India, you were in India, or it could be anywhere, but a foreign land. In the last 3 years, did you work for that company continuously for 1 year or more? If in the last 3 years you did that, you might be eligible for the L. So it's time to go back to the employer and say, hey, what about an L? You have to advocate for yourself. Don't ever assume your HR, your people will advocate for you. They may not know, or they may not have a policy at work to allow this. And I've often asked my clients, did you ask them about a transfer? Did you ask them about going to Canada? They might not know, and they might say no. And then I look on the Canadian website of the company and they're advertising and looking for that kind of person. So it's amazing to see that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing when you're talking about entities in 2 different countries, even though they're the same. Okay? Walk into a Toronto Dominion bank and ask to open a Canadian bank account and you'll see what I'm talking about, because that's a Canadian bank. They should know how to do that, okay? They don't. So you need to advocate for yourself and learn these things, and that's why you're here. Okay, in part. You're not going to learn everything here. Another type of visa that might be possible is an O1. So I think a few of you said you've heard of the O1. So the O1 visa, yep. Okay, so the O1 visa has to do with outstanding ability. O, outstanding, get it? So the outstanding ability visa is a good visa to consider, but it's a non-immigrant visa. So you have to go from that, switch into, let's say, an EB2 immigrant visa to be able to stay. So again, temporary solution, just perhaps as a stopgap measure. Like Roman said in the beginning, there's no perfect solution. If you want to stay here, you consider those options. We'll get to other options, unconventional options, in a little while, which very few people have thought of, but that are excellent options, okay? Then you have treaties, a number of different treaties that will allow you to have a different kind of visa in the US. So for example, Canadians can use something called a TN visa. So a TN is a treaty visa that will be a 3-year visa. Again, non-immigrant, renewable indefinitely. So you might be here on an H-1B, but if, let's say, you're Canadian, more people are still coming in. It's great. So let's say you're a Canadian and you have that option to go back to the employer and say, how about I fly back to Toronto and any Canadians here? Maybe I shouldn't. Oh, bravo! So fly back to Toronto and then just come right back as a TN. And as a Canadian, you can get a TN right at the border. So no wait times. We love TNs. They're great if you can have them. Different categories of professional occupations in a TN. There's about 60 professions. But there's also intercompany transfers like the L1 we spoke about. So these are options to consider. Okay, then options outside of your current employer. So that might not be something you discuss with your employer as much, but you should consider them as well. So some of us have said that you're familiar with the EB1, EB2 categories. So those would be, you have the EB1A, okay, which is going to be specifically for the types of extraordinary people that you're talking about have to be really extraordinary, okay? So a lot of people think you're going to do an EB1. Hey, of course, everyone thinks they're extraordinary. No. There are selective factors, and USCIS is going to be very, very specific about what they're looking for. So don't expect that to be an easy process by any means. What you see on the websites is not always what it is, okay? So get the advice. Do not go by the chat rooms. Do not go, I can't say that enough. I mean, as a lawyer, remember, the stuff we see there is really, every case is different. Every case is different. I always get clients saying to me, oh, but my friend switched from an O to an EB. Whoa! No, that doesn't mean you can do it, because that person may have met the extraordinary person threshold, but you won't. Like, you really can't generalize, okay? So you've got as well the EB2 or non-interest waiver types, national interest waiver, sorry, types of visas that are possible. Again, permanent stay, but high threshold of outstanding, extraordinary person. You've got self-petition E2. Okay, so you got a great business idea, jump on it. Possibly will work, okay? E2 visas, you have to have an investment at risk, but in some cases, you don't even need a big investment, okay? So we prepare, I know my firm, we have a business plan developer on staff who basically will look, he knows the stuff way better than me. He looks at a business idea for somebody and he'll say, yes, this will pass the threshold. He's really good, and he's done hundreds of them. And you can have a very big, right now we have a client who's going into the health industry. She's a Canadian coming into the US. They've already invested over $300,000. It's actually too much. We are trying to scale them back. USCIS will say an investment of $300,000 in a health wellness industry, like a Club Pilates type of thing or whatever. That's too much. That's not good. So there's a fine line and a fine balance, and you can have somebody who, we have somebody who's a auto business, he fixes up those fancy, you'd love this, by the way, Aston Martin cars, he redoes the aluminum bodies for these cars, okay? His investment is $30,000, but for what that is, it will be great. That's the right amount. So again, it's a fine line, and you have to work with a team of people who know the investment. But an E2 is a great visa. It's a 2-year visa, and it's a non-immigrant visa. Remember, always know the nature of the visa. If it's immigrant, non-immigrant, and go back to what you want. Ask yourself what you want. Do I want to stay here long term, or am I just looking for another couple of years?
The E2, however, is renewable indefinitely.
That's
so
true.
Even if it is a 2 or 3 year visa, if you can renew it indefinitely, I know some people who are on an E2 visa here for decades.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. So Canada wouldn't allow that.
Okay.
Because I guess the proof of ties maybe is not as strong here on an E2. I don't know. All right, and then what else do we have?
Fourth one down, I maintain.
So do you want to maintain your F1 status? So that's an interesting one. Do you want to stay a student?
Or go back to being a student.
Or go
I know a
back
lot
to
of you
being a
folks are
student.
working right now.
Good, true.
That is an option that some people take.
So that's another option, to extend your stay. Again, ask yourself, what's your long-term goal? Don't just keep hopping from visa to visa. Think of your long-term goal, okay? Really important. And then work with an advisor who can get you there. Find a cap-exempt employer. Nice. That involves shopping for another job here, obviously, in an employee who's not subject to the H-1B cap.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Veronique. And we'll get back a little bit to some of the U.S. immigration options too, but we wanted to give you kind of an overview of the general ones. So now we're going to talk about unconventional alternatives to H-1B, and I'll turn it to Mark. Surprise, if you looked at the presentation, part of the unconventional aspect of opportunity here is Canada. So, this is, Mark, what you do with your business. You help folks who are in the U.S. basically keep their job and move to Canada and work there and get sponsored for a visa, eventually green card, etc. So, this is, talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, so this becomes the unconventional option that almost no one hears about. And unfortunately, that's why we do events like this, because what we usually hear is someone saying, I went to my company, I went to my US immigration lawyer, they mapped out everything Veronique just said, none of those worked. I'm out of luck, I'm gonna leave the US when my OPT expires. And we're always horrified to hear that because it's like there's another option. So what we're basically describing an option is same US job, and I'm gonna walk through that. You're gonna be like, wait a minute, Mark, I see a Canadian flag there and you're saying same US job. How do I take a US job and export it? This is what this slide basically says it all. You stay in exactly the same job. Everyone who we work with takes their laptop from the US and they take it with them. Your same US boss, they were on a Zoom or Teams calls, a small box, they're still there. Nothing changes. Same time zone. It's not about saying we're gonna park you in Dubai, park you in Singapore. It's you're in LA and now you're in Vancouver. So we're gonna walk through how that works, but basically it's everything you have now up north of the border. So this question comes up a lot. People will say, okay, wait a minute. Me and my family did everything I could to get me to the US. Things were sacrificed along the way, money was saved, you went to a great US university. This is where you wanted to be. The sad reality is, and both of you have practiced US immigration law sometimes isn't your friend, it's gonna let you down. And all of you probably can think of someone who didn't win the H-1B lottery, OPT expired, they went back home, and you're like, wait a minute, that person did everything right. Top grades, got amazing job, did what they were supposed to do, and then US immigration let them down.
One of my closest friends from college is Turkish, and then he got his MBA here, and he had an amazing job. And he was here on an H-1B, and then his employer just didn't file for his green card, and he just had to go back to Turkey. And to be fair, I visited him in Turkey so many times now, and I absolutely love it there. But it's sad. I literally lost my friend who I spent all my time here with, and I'm an immigration lawyer. I feel like it was my responsibility. But it's something that happens. Even if you guys have a job, you went to school with people who may have had to leave, and it's a bummer. So if he knew about the Canada option, maybe he would have been a little bit closer.
Yeah, this is about education. So what we're going to walk through a scenario how this works is, especially there's a couple Canadians I know who raised your hands. You're looking at this like, I know that option. I lived it. I was born there. That might have not applied to the couple of you, but basically takes the stress out. So many conversations we've had with people where they're waiting on the lottery results, waiting on what my lawyer says. It's like, what if you didn't have to wait for that? What if you knew that there's another system that works a lot easier? We're gonna walk through how that works. It's your same US employer. So it's everyone we speak with, we talk with them, they hear the story, we talk with their manager, the US company says, this is amazing, we were remote anyway, no one was coming to the office, so this person just went from our Brooklyn office to now they're sitting in Toronto, or we were all remote in LA, now this person's in Vancouver, no different. So the solution most likely works for the company you're with. Also, we're gonna walk through the the scenario of how Canadian immigration works, permanent residency, I have met the dozens of the people we've moved up. Every single one of them between year 1 and 2 says, I'm a permanent resident. Some are month 12, some are month 22, 23. Within 2 years, all of them are like, I'm a Canadian permanent resident, Canadian version of a green card. I have never spoke to anyone in the US who said, hey, slam dunk, I got my H-1B, I'm gonna get my green card for sure, I'm gonna get it in 12 to 24 months, I'm not even worried about it. Everyone has concerns. We're gonna show the difference of the systems. So also, Canadian passport comes in 4 to 5 years. When Veronique mentioned the TN visa, there's a scenario here because this is hard for, as an American citizen, my personal interest obviously lies with the US, and I'm like, I wanna see that the smartest people are here. The people who work really hard, including everyone in this room. The ideal scenario is if you stay here. But if US immigration lets you down, there's a strategy we call the boomerang strategy, which is take control of your own immigration destiny, take your job, move it to Canada. Same job, same paycheck, you're sitting in Vancouver, it's a little different. You have an umbrella, it's a little bit colder, you're fine. In 2 years, you get your permanent residency. You're like, okay, step 1, 2 years, I have the right to live in Canada for the rest of my life. You keep working remotely for US companies. You get to year 4, you get the Canadian passport, and you're like, then you have a choice. You can be like, I'm set, I love hockey, I love this place, there's no reason to leave, I'm gonna hang out here. But what you could also do is you could be like, Canadian citizen, Canadian passport. I want that TN visa. I wanna come back to the US, work in the US, I want my Silicon Valley career, I miss New York, I'm coming right back. But you're coming back on a TN visa, and as Veronique said, it's renewable indefinitely. So when I was going to school in Canada, when I did my grad school there were a bunch of Canadians who are like, hey, when I graduate, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, going to LA, they set themselves up to be in the US for decades. The difference with this strategy is, for some of you, you get the H-1B and you think you won, and then the US immigration lawyer says, 37-year wait for a green card. What did you win? Waiting 37 years and keeping your fingers crossed that you never get laid off from that job, that nothing ever goes wrong, you don't have 60 days to find something else? We just throw this out there saying, if you love the US and it's the happiest place you've been, what if you could just use Canadian immigration, be up there for 4 years, get the passport, come back? You may want to stay. We're just thinking it's an option. So this is an example. As I mentioned, we moved 100 people to Canada over the years. This is me with a few of the people we moved. So on the far left is Pranav. In the middle of COVID, this is like 3 months in, June of 2020, his company in Dallas calls and says, Pranav didn't win the H-1B lottery. He will be gone from the US by December. He will be kicked out. And their comment was, no matter how much we care about him as a person, we cannot employ him when he goes back to India. We need everyone in the same time zone or 1 or 2 time zones off. This isn't gonna work. Walk us through how this works. We moved him up in the middle of COVID. Even though the border was closed, Canada views people on work visas as critical to the economy. He had to go through that obnoxious COVID test that no one wants to think about anymore, but he got into Canada. When I saw him for this dinner about a year back, his comment to me was, everything you said worked. I was a permanent resident in 18 months. I'm set. I was working remotely for that US company. They got bought. I'm working for another company remotely. I'm a Canadian permanent resident. I can work for anyone I want on either side of the border. I can work remotely for the American companies, or I can work for Canadian companies. I'm like, cool. It turned out to be exactly as you wished. Everyone else at the table then tuned in. So Kanwaljit sitting next to him, he had like, I think a 27-year wait for a green card. And he's like, I love the US, but 27 years, and what if something goes wrong? So he went to his employer and said, hey, there's this company Syndesis. They can get me a Canadian work visa. They can get me across the border. I can get Canadian permanent residence, be a Canadian citizen, and not have uncertainty. And his employer's like, that's fine, we support you. We've supported you in getting an H-1B. Instead of supporting you for a green card, we'll support you for a Canadian green card. He's in Vancouver. When I saw him, he'd been up there 6 months. He tuned in right away to what Pranav said. He's like, how long? How much longer do you have to wait? My lawyer told me another year versus 27. Sometimes it's as simple as that. Do you want to wait 1.5 years or 27 years? That's a personal choice. All of you will be making that choice at some point. Sitting next to him in the middle, Nima, OPT expired, citizen of Iran. Whether or not you follow Iranian politics, If you did, no one looks at Iran and says, I can't wait to go to Tehran and spend my tech career there. One-on-one when we were waiting outside for an Uber, after he said thank you, he said, Mark, he says, I tried so hard to get out. Going back is like soul crushing. He's like, I did everything in the US possible to leave. He's like, if your company hadn't come along, I would have had to go back to Iran. There were no other options. And I'm like, welcome to Canada. Listen, Pranav's gonna spell it at the store. You're gonna be a permanent resident in a year and a half. You're gonna be a citizen in 4. And lastly, Hua Q, sitting right next to me. Hua had a job offer from a company in LA. He was far inland in mainland China, and the company said, we're not hiring you that many time zones off. We tried to get you into the US, we were not successful. And then he says, wait a minute, I found another option. What if I'm up in Vancouver? You guys are a remote company. And they said, West Coast of North America is fine. If we can't get you into the US, if you can find an option to get into Canada, that works for us. Had a call with him and his US employer. They're like, this is great. Every US option failed. We need him in North America. Vancouver's close enough. Cool US job. He has that, and he's working remotely from Canada on his way to being a Canadian permanent resident. Canadian immigration options. Veronique, over to you.
Yeah. So those are some of the kind of stories about it, but now we're going to get into the different visa types that exist within Canada.
Yeah, and what Mark is describing is he's really bottled the formula of what I used to call, like 10 years ago, the Microsoft syndrome, right? What Microsoft did in Silicon Valley is they realized we don't want to lose all this great talent that we've trained, but we can't keep everyone for different reasons, and immigration being one of them. And that's when Microsoft established itself up in Vancouver. The same thing, fast forward 7 years later, same formula, but different product, okay? We'll talk about the difference, but the formula, again, is parking yourself north in the same time zone, and you have Netflix and Amazon coming from the US going north near Toronto and what we call the Silicon Valley of the North, which is around the Hamilton, Ontario area. So this is not like it's an unconventional because people don't talk about it openly, and lawyers are not often creative. You have to understand, lawyers are, especially immigration lawyers, do volume work. What does that mean? You spit out the same cookie recipe all the time. And lawyers are often not creative. We are a profession that is built on precedent. So we follow the same pattern. There's been studies shown that the lawyers are the people least able of change. And that just has to do with, again, the way that our brains are formulated. But when you come across an idea that works and that is within the confines of the law, and I can tell you that I've known Mark many years now, and his system works, and he has the approval and the permission of Canadian. I think when we first met, that was my first, I said, how'd you get that? Because,
that's in place.
remember that? I said,
Yeah.
how'd you get that permission from Canadian immigration to bring these people over? Because they won't give it to me. They'll give it to my clients, but not me. They don't like lawyers, right? It's just the way it is. It's supposed to be a non-adversarial system. It kind of is an adversarial system. But Mark, not being a lawyer, hey, and having a great connection with Canada and the U.S., they were all ears with him. And I followed his achievements over the years, and it's a great formula, which is why I accepted to come today. So these nice Canadian options here, let's talk about these. Express entry, anyone heard of that? Okay, misnomer, there's nothing express about it, okay? Express entry was a great decision at the time, that immigration minister at the time, who thought, well, let's get people in based on the point system, right? The point system essentially is your age, gets you a lot of points. If you're, everyone here is probably fine. I'd be out in the water. Then you have your education, your years of professional work, and your language scores. Huge points on language. Most people don't speak French. But if you do well on an English test, IELTS, it's a designated language test. It's not just any English test. You have to prepare for it. But if you do well, you'll probably get enough points for what? Not for permanent residence. You get enough points to go into a pool of candidates that then have to wait. and you wait, and you wait. And every couple of weeks, it's really, should be every couple of weeks, it's every 3 weeks, they draw, the government draws, the Canadian government decides who they're gonna invite to apply for immigration. So it really is kind of a lottery, okay? And so you're gonna have, usually you're supposed to process in about 6 months. In fact, they're processing applicants in 5 months right now, but it's 5 months from the time you file your application. So remember, prior to filing your application, you have to prepare, do your English tests, do your credentials accreditation. So if you have a bachelor's or a master's degree from a foreign country, even the US, remember, in Canada we consider the US foreign, so you have to get that accredited by special World Education Services or another organization, again, recognized by the government. So there's a whole bunch of, 3 to 4 months to prepare a file, okay? Then you're in the pool, you're waiting again. And it could be another 3 or 4 months before you're, depending on the point cap, okay? And then you file. And preparing the files another, they give you 60 days, we can do it in around 40 days, and then you're waiting again. So you're really looking at a minimum of a year if you're lucky, okay? So express entry, nothing fast about it. One important thing to know though, for all of you who may be on US visas here and considering other options, there's nothing wrong with considering a Canadian option. It won't affect your Canadian visa status, okay?
Your US visa status.
Sorry, thank you. That's where you're here, and I need you. So your US visa status is not affected necessarily by you just applying for Canadian immigration. And the same way we get car insurance when we drive a car, we should get insurance on our immigration status. What if this doesn't work? What am I gonna do after? Get something going. You can always not go. So insurance is throwing money out the window, right? You don't get into a car accident. Well, you know what? You throw a little bit of money out, but if you don't, your H-1B caps out, you have a process that you already started. The worst thing you can do, the worst case scenario is just say, I don't need it anymore. I got my green card. Okay? So when you're accepted for permanent residence in Canada, they'll give you about 1.5 years to move. So keep that in mind as well. Citizenship, okay, well that's only once you become a permanent resident, right, that you get it 3 years later. So I'm gonna skip over that right away. And then PNPs, called provincial nominee programs. So that's a little bit different than what I described before. It leads to permanent residence, but the difference is the province. Like we have provinces the same way the US has states. So we have provinces, the province gets to select who they want, because some provinces need more types of workers than others, okay? Typically, people go to Vancouver, Ontario, or Montreal. But there's a lot more places that people can go in Canada, and so they've allowed the provinces that are more disadvantaged, let's say they don't have enough people, to be able to recruit that way. You still have to go into a pool, and it is employer sponsored. A lot of people come up to me and say, oh, what about PNP? I don't know why. There must be, I'll look at it one day with the head of a client, but PNP needs a job offer. You can't just go into a PNP program. You still need a Canadian employer to make you a job offer. So that's something that must be very unwell explained, because I've heard it many, many times online, okay? Global talent stream. Now we're entering Mark's waters. Okay, so this is a great program that was just started a few years ago, I think 4 years ago. Time flies. But when that came in, it was very exciting, because the global talent stream is when Canada realized we need to do something to attract better tech talent. We just need it. They're desperate for tech talent. Another thing, just to take a step back, I want to explain to you, is that I've always said, the US, everyone wants to come to the US, and then they realize, oh, I should have considered Canada. And the reason I think it's important to consider Canada is because it's a very different lifestyle. As I'm walking here in downtown New York, I don't know how many people bumped into me. I'm trying to walk. I'm like, excuse me. Okay, it's a different lifestyle. Here, it's like go, 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 go. Canada is different. My staff in Canada would stop me mid-sentence. You're gonna love this. I'm sorry, Veronique, it's 5 o'clock. I gotta go. That was it. I'm like, what? That was it. You do that in New York, you're not coming in tomorrow. It's just not, it's a different culture. So in Canada, consider that life comes first. You work to live. In the US, you live to work. And that has been my philosophy, and I've seen it time and time again. Why I'm still here? Because I need to work. But okay, that's the best question, right? Do this, by the way, before you have kids, because then you can't move. So this is Global Talent Stream. I'm going to let Mark. He's really so well versed in it. We do them. My firm does them if they don't have an opportunity, like what Syndesis offers. But in general, it's I'm going to let you take over. It's just a great program. And this chart is amazing.
Yeah, we put this together because, but I think we should be sending this out to everyone. So definitely feel free to take any pictures if something comes up, no problem at all. Why we put this together is, as Americans, as people living in the US, you're gonna look in the middle and say, this is what I know. This is what I was told in university. This is what my company said to me. This is what my US immigration lawyer said to me. It's basically like people are chosen in the US by lottery. In Canada, it's more merit. When you walk through these, the ones that matter are, you get to the third one, it's like H-1B 85,000 cap. Everyone knows that number. Last year, 723,000 applications. People gamed it, there were multiple applications per person. This year it's back into the 400,000 range. In Canada, I keep hearing people saying, well, Mark, how many work visas they give out each year? I'm like, it's not capped. This is not the US.
Yeah.
And the question is, well, Mark, what's the number? I'm like, there's no number. Canada wants tech talent. When I went to university in Canada, what I heard from everyone who was getting a tech degree, 1/4 to 1/3 of the graduating class from University of Toronto, University of Waterloo, University of British Columbia, all the top Canadian schools, they all get recruited to the US. So there's massive brain drain in Canada going to the US. So the Canadian government's like, let's bring in immigrants that are super smart because our citizens want the US money and they're leaving. That's why they put Global Talent Stream in place, but they made it easy. So the highlights are no cap. When it comes to green card, this question comes up all the time. So a Canadian worker will come, we employ 100 plus who we've moved, they'll come to us and they're like, well, we need your help for permanent residence. And I'm like, you think you're used to the US where your US employer kind of holds you hostage? In Canada, the program is set up for immigration where if you want a green card or you want a Canadian permanent resident, you do it yourself. Your employer has nothing to do with it. They don't tell you what to do. They don't sponsor you. You do it yourself. And that was the shock that the people that we move up, every time I meet them, they're like, yeah, Mark, it turned out to be true. I went and applied and a year and a half later I got it. And I'm like, cool, now you're in control of your own destiny. They're like, but in the US, I'm like, I know. The US is the US. There's other systems. So that's one distinction. Time frame, 5 to 50 years for a green card versus 12 to 24 months in Canada. That's the slam dunk for any Indian nationals. Enough people we've helped move have looked at that and said, that number's everything. It didn't matter that I won the H-1B lottery. Being told I'm waiting 27 years like Commonwealth, he's like, how do I live that way? How do I buy a house knowing that if I lose my job or my company went bankrupt, I don't find another job that sponsors me in 60 days, I'm permanently kicked out of the US? And I'm like, I'm sorry, that's how US immigration is. We found you a better option. So again, there's a lot of comparisons there. Third one from the bottom, the last thing I'll say is approval rate. Last year, if you did the numbers and you're like 100,000 people apply for an H-1B, 85,000 accepted, it's 1 in 3, 1 in 4, 1 in 5. The Canadian immigration lawyers I work with are like, Mark, I put 99% there and their comment was, have you ever seen anyone you've sent here turned down for a Global Talent Stream work visa? And I'm like, no, I haven't. And they're like, you should put 100%. I'm like, that feels like, there's gotta be an exception somewhere. And they're like, put 99 if you want, but if you apply, you get it. And so these are a few, you've seen these, Veronique. It's like people say, well, like, wait, here comes the sad news. And I was looking for the attendance here and I saw like someone who had applied was like an MBA and I'm like, bummer. Consultants, sales reps, marketing people, MBAs. If that's your degree, if that's where you have your H-1B in the US, Global Talent Stream is about having people who have a technical background. Data scientists, any role you see on here, you get it. Every once in a while, and I'm about to tell someone no, and this is the good advice Veronique gave, every time I'm about to tell someone to call or someone on my team to say, I don't know if you apply, a Canadian immigration lawyer will be like, Mark, I looked on the person's CV. I saw they had a tech degree. They're a business analyst. Yes, they're working in real estate, but they're actually doing a little bit of analysis. Here's the reasons it worked. And I'm like, I almost told someone they shouldn't apply. My team knows never to say no. It goes over to a Canadian immigration lawyer. They will validate and see if they can find you a way. Unlike in the US, Canadian immigration officials are actually, the goal was to get 200,000 people in, not tell 200,000 people no. So they'll actually try to help you. It's just a different approach. But any of these work for this type of work visa we're talking about. So how do you get this work visa? You determine if you're eligible, and then my company has a way that we can get you a Canadian work visa and then move you to Canada. So basically, this is the question. These are the questions that we'd have to determine if you get this. You have to have a job. The worst phone calls we get for someone saying, I just got laid off in the US. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Like this works if you have a current job. So you have to have a current US job, or like Joaquin, you work for a global company, a company's trying to get you into the US and can't, then Canada becomes the option. It's a tech job, but it's anything you saw on that previous list, anything tech or tech-ish. Base salary is $65,000. Anyone in tech literally probably has a salary of $65,000 or over. It's an easy bar to pass. The other angle is a US company wants to keep you. So you're working for a US company, they know you're expired OPT, and their reaction is like, we are extremely disappointed you're a part of our team. Usually at the point that what we're so used to hearing is the conversation's over. US HR person says, we talked to our lawyer, we can't keep you. I'm sorry. We tried the O1, we tried the EB-visas, we tried everything. What they don't usually know is, as Veronique said, the US immigration lawyer will never suggest this because they're US immigration professionals. Their whole goal is to try to get you to stay. When all their options are done, they go back to your employer and say, I'm sorry. And right then it's like people's dream ends. But then if there's an angle where it's like, no, you can move. You also have to have a remote job. So a couple times we get people who they work in labs and they're working chip design, or there's something that's very much lab based. And we're like, does this work? We're like, no, you have to have a remote job. If you have a remote job, this works. You can take your laptop with you. We had someone who did some lab work, and his company actually shipped, I don't know how, it was like a box about like 8 feet by 8 feet, a bunch of equipment. They shipped it up from Rochester, New York to him in Toronto. He assembled it in his apartment. And he's like, I can still do my work here. And I'm like, cool. That option worked for him. He was able to keep his job. And then also this last bullet here, when I also looked on the list of people who are attending, I saw some big names. I saw Amazon, I saw Google. If you're working for a big company like that, your choice then is to go to them and say, L1, what can I do in Canada? If you're working for a company like that, they have to take care of you. They won't come to a small company like us. So most of our clients are smaller, medium-sized US companies or tech firms that don't have an office in Canada. They come to us and say, can you please handle the situation? So all those things have to line up. And then lastly, your employer has to be involved. Here comes the bummer part. We've had people come to a presentation like this, and then we never see them again, even though when we ask the questions, your OPT expired? And they're like, yes. Are you leaving the US? Yes, this is my last opportunity. And this is the part that's the most disappointing for me to hear, is one-on-one, the conversation is, Mark, I couldn't see telling my company to talk to you about this. I thought it would be an imposition on them. I thought there might be a cost. I thought they might say no or get frustrated that I brought them this solution. And what we tell them is, what they don't know is the HR person at your company, if you leave on OPT and it expires and you leave and you go back to your home country and you're gone and you're no longer working for the company, that HR person, if they were here, I ask them all the time, I'm like, what's the replacement cost for a tech worker in the US? And they're like 50 to 100,000. So they actually, what I've heard, what also surprised me is when I asked, how much money do you set aside for H-1B lottery, for green card? And the budgets I hear are 20 to 30,000 in legal fees are set aside to fight to keep you in the country. So when they lose that, if the H-1B lottery is lost, most times that company's like, we still want you, we'll take one more swing. And then we show over the Canadian option, they're like, oh, that was easy. Oh, 100% or 99% sure you're gonna get the work visa? Slam dunk. So it becomes an option that they don't know about, but they're willing to invest because they're willing to invest in all of you because not because you're part of the company, but tech workers are extremely valuable. The knowledge you have from 2 to 3 years, they don't want to lose that.
Can I add something to that? Because I know there are folks here who are on H-1B. They're not going to lose you to the lottery because you're already on an H-1B visa, but they may still lose you. I definitely know people who, well, like my friend who didn't get his green card sponsored at all, so they didn't keep doing extensions. But there are people who, like you said, they don't want to stay here for 27 years. Maybe they'll look around for other jobs, whatever it might be. And so this is an option for somebody to basically retain talent, not avoid losing them also. I mean, that too, but in other cases, retain talent. I think I was talking to you about this before. I think you mentioned to me that there are some companies that will offer this to their employees as a benefit because they know that you hate waiting for the green card, and then they might say, what if we would you like it if we brought you up to Canada? Would that make your life easier? And I think you've had some folks who said, yes, that would be amazing because then I could buy a house, feel settled, etc. And it's like a benefit. So just something to think about for folks here who, you're not worried about losing the H-1B lottery because you have your H-1B, but perhaps you're thinking about next steps.
Yeah, thanks for pointing out, Roman. That's another scenario that we hear. It's not always just OPT expiring. It's also people on H-1B with no hope of a green card.
Right.
That's most of what I find we get.
So I guess we wanted to, and you guys can feel free to shout something out, but we wanted to ask you all here. Does anyone here? Have you thought about a plan B? Now that we've talked through some of this, have you thought about sort of an alternative option to your current immigration situation? If you want to maybe just raise your hand if you've done it. Well, we will in just a moment, yeah. But we're not going to talk about details, but we're going to ask you if you've thought about an alternative option, or if you maybe are considering something now. Just a show of hands. Yeah, because the whole point of this discussion was just basically to arm you with a little bit of additional information, so that you know what else is out there. I heard some folks have heard of, let's say, O1, EB1, EB2NIW on the US side. Some haven't. So something for you to think about. Honestly, most people don't even think about Canada, which is really, one of the why it's so unconventional. Literally, it's not conventional. No one talks about it. And I say this as a US immigration attorney as well. So we hope that this is, hopefully going to make you think a little bit. Go, obviously do a little bit of research. Think about your career. Think about your education. Like Veronique said, think about your goals in life. Whether you do want to stay here, maybe you don't want to stay here. That's okay too. But if you do want to stay here, what are the different ways of doing that? We wanted to give you just, as we wrap up here, we wanted to give you just some resources for alternative steps next steps for alternatives in the U.S. If you want to talk about any of those U.S. options, I had a conversation earlier. If you have immigration counsel already, of course, talk to them. If you don't, if you scan this here, this will take you to Veronique's website, if you want to set up a consultation. If you don't, maybe Veronique has other folks that you can refer people to depending on what their needs are. And by the way, the reason Veronique is here is because her firm does both US and Canadian immigration law. So we have two amazing skill sets in one place.
But just so you know, because I know lawyers, if you have a US lawyer, tell them I just do Canadian. It's okay. I would never mow anyone else's lawn, isn't my expression. That's just not who I am. But some lawyers can get a little bit concerned about that. What if I send you, well, she works for you, she might, take my other US clients, and that is it's just not the case. We get a lot of calls from lawyers in the US saying, someone told me about Canadian and they gave me your name, like, what's going on with that? And then we can discuss all the various programs. So as Roman said, it's not something that's talked about, and yet Canada's the second biggest country after Russia in the world. So there's a lot of room and a lot of need, and it's really close, okay? Any questions about Canada, I'm happy to answer. I've lived equally in both. As I said, I endorse Syndesus as a proper legal, well-founded program. It works. It's not talked about, but it's excellent.
And if you want to learn more about Syndesus,
Yeah.
that's this slide. So feel free to scan the QR code if you'd like, just to check out their website and see what's there. And now we'll stop the recording. So thank you.